Hi and welcome to the webinar number 4, April 26th, and we've got Anna Kinnane with our presentation today on integrating digital technology with all other subjects. For today, you'll notice that you've been muted, but you can actually provide some interaction through our questions section if you want to add in questions, and hi to Sue Carter out there who's already contacted us. Today, hopefully, we'll have some opportunities for you to interact with us and to use the questions section, and also we're going to have a few polls today. So today we've got the we're going to have some practical examples from Anna about how to integrate the digital technologies, and Anna's done a lot of work in terms of her digital technologies and the curriculum areas. So we should be getting some really good ideas about how to plan and how to implement digital technology with other areas. Just to let you know, I'm Martin Richards and work on the Digital Technologies Hub. If you haven't been to our Digital Technologies Hub, which I'm sure you would have been already by now, you would have noticed that we've got a section on the Hub with lesson ideas and how to filter your lesson ideas by either year level and subject area. So I'm just going to go to show you the actual the website, and where are we? Oh, bring it up. And if you go into the teachers section, so click the teachers section, we've got a section on lesson ideas, and scroll down and you'll see the section that you can filter by. So today Anna's going to be talking about some of these lesson plans that you can have a look at. So one of the things is you can sort of filter by, if you're teaching a year 3-4 class, you can filter by year 3-4 and look at some of the lesson ideas that we've got in terms of if they're English or mathematics, you can have a look at. There's for year 5-6, we've got quite a few different resources there that you can use. If you wanted to look at which ones are for year 5-6 and say English, they'll come up there. So that's, if Anna's talking about some of these resources, you can have a look at your own leisure at some of those resources that we've got on the Digital Technologies Hub. So Anna's basically done a lot of work in this area. She's been an author of the Australian curriculum, or one of the authors there. She's done some writing for us with the Digital Technologies curriculum. She's got a wealth of ideas, and I'd like to welcome Anna today. If she can pop her webcam on, and here she is. Anna, welcome, and today I know you've got a great lot of ideas. We've got so many ideas, we've probably got 2 hours worth for our presentation today, but I'll hand over to you and we'll get into it.
Thank you, Martin, and hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. I'm sure all of you have had a big day at school, and you're keen to hear some messages that will be of value to you as you sort through and implement this new curriculum. I'm just going to turn off my webcam. I'm joining you today from Toowong in Brisbane, here in Queensland. It's a bit rainy today, and Martin's there in Melbourne. And I'm sure that we've got teachers joining us from all over the country. So thank you very much for your participation. As Martin mentioned, I'm going to be spending a little bit of time giving you some of the key messages that surround this curriculum, some tips for implementation. Then we're going to look at how you can actually align this curriculum with what you are already doing, and giving you some practical lesson examples using the Digital Technologies Hub as a resource to support you. And in saying that, what we're going to do now is find out a little bit about yourselves. So, for example, with this introduction of any curriculum, we've got teachers with diverse skill sets. We've got some teachers who have already started implementing. We just want to know a little bit about your level of understanding. So if you could just respond to our poll question there, and so we can find out a little bit about your level of understanding.
So we've got 20% have voted so far, Anna.
Great.
Just over the halfway mark.
And what's the consensus?
Oh, I can't give out any secrets just yet, I'm sorry. 70, 80% have voted, and I'll shut it down in a few seconds. Just have a go. 85, looking for the 90%. There we go. So you should better see it.
Oh, that's fantastic. So that's great to see that we've got a few people still haven't had a chance, and that's perfectly normal and fine. 18% know a little bit about it. Some still a bit of a mystery, and there are, some people with good understanding. So that's fantastic and pretty indicative of what happens in most audiences in regard to this new curriculum. So the next question. Have you started to implement Digitech in your school or classroom?
Frantically voting there. 45% already filled out.
Oh, they're fast workers, Martin.
Obviously had a really good day. 80% voted. Last few seconds. Just sharing that now.
Fantastic. So that's great to see. So some of you have already started implementing and others yet to do so. And I am aware that we have our primary teachers in our audience. And I'm sure that we probably also have some teachers who may have the responsibility of supporting other teachers with the implementation of this curriculum. You might have curriculum leaders or school leaders in our audience. So I just want to mention a couple of things to demystify some of the myths and to dispel some of those myths that may be out there surrounding this curriculum. This curriculum is new. It is brand new for those teachers in primary schools particularly, because never before have we seen the introduction of brand new content. We've seen realignment of other learning areas, but this is new. So it's okay for teachers to say, you know what, I don't quite understand and I do need some support. So just remember, if you are working with teachers in this space, it is okay to say, I need a little bit of extra help. One of my messages is don't panic, take time. With the implementation of any curriculum, it cannot be done overnight. Please don't get caught up with the notion that this curriculum is all about teaching students just to code and program. Whilst it's a very important part of the curriculum, there are many other skills, knowledges and understandings that need to be developed. Whilst 2016 may have been a familiarisation year for many schools, 2017 may be the year that you are actually starting to delve much more deeply into this. So we're going to share some of the resources to support you and your colleagues. So one of the challenges is helping develop teacher confidence and capability. Now, the digital technologies curriculum is only going to be a success if you and your colleagues are provided with the necessary professional development to become confident. Now, in the Australian Curriculum Digital Technologies and the ICT capability, they explain that the minimum expectation every child in Australia has to develop not only digital literacy, but to discover the fundamental concepts of computer science and information systems. Now, you have to consider now your context. By that I mean, don't worry too much about the school down the road. Don't worry about the classroom next to you. You need to consider those students in front of you at this point of time. We're talking about the technology available to you. Some teachers are in BYOD schools, some are in one-to-one classrooms, some have great connectivity, some don't. So what you need to think about first and foremost is your level of capacity to do this and the resources available to you, and start there. The other thing we need to be mindful of is the Australian Professional Standards for Teachers. Now, this is a public statement of what constitutes teacher quality, and when we consider the introduction of any new curriculum, the 3 standards that relate directly to this are 1s, 2 and 6, but most importantly, standard number 2, know the content and how to teach it. So your professional development over the next year or 2 or 3 can be supported by the introduction of a new curriculum. You can start planning your personal professional development to support you in learning some new skills and knowledges if that's something that needs to happen. with you. Okay, I think it's really important that our teachers and the teachers that are working with you in your classrooms and in your schools have good curriculum literacy. When we're talking about a new curriculum, this curriculum particularly was written with the expectation that it would be taught in context with other learning areas from F to 6 I'm talking about here. Because with an indicative teaching time of 30 minutes per week, it's impossible to expect you to teach this curriculum in isolation. However, you need to be able to make some links across other learning areas, and to do this, teachers really need to know all the learning area content very well before they can make those alignment connections. And while we're talking about technology literacy or curriculum literacy, I'm not going to dwell on this, but it's important if you are aware or if you can support other teachers to remember that we have two components when we're talking about digital technologies. We have the ICT general capability in the Australian curriculum where our students become effective users of ICT, and these capabilities are embedded in all learning areas. Now we have a new discipline, the digital technologies curriculum, and in this context, our students, we are supporting them to become developers of digital solutions. Important that we remember that. A good way to look at it is when we're talking about the discipline, digital technologies, capital D, capital T. We've talked about this before. It really should have been called computer science, I have to say, because there's so much confusion around the difference between Digitech curriculum and, of course, digital technologies, as in devices, tablets, etc., when we're looking at lowercase d, lowercase t. And, of course, the ICT general capability. And I like to consider that as, or look at that as, a digital literacy component where we've got communicating, creating, operating, and managing and using ICT safely. Okay, this slide is just, to reinforce that there is new terminology in this new curriculum, lots of different concepts that some teachers will need some support in understanding, not just knowing the content, but how to make that engaging and how to teach it effectively. So what you may not have had any input over is the content of this curriculum, but what you have 100% influence over is the way it's delivered and the way it's received by your students. And I've just got this little graphic up here because, as you may be aware, digital technologies curriculum was one of the last curriculums to be written. So in all of the other learning areas, you can see how ICT and digital technologies, and when we're talking about devices, is represented differently across the learning areas. So that can cause a little bit of confusion for teachers when they're coming to grips with the terminology. Okay, step number one, I suggest you read this curriculum, and by reading it I mean go to the actual Australian curriculum website, start looking at the introduction, read the key ideas, read the rationale, read the aims, because that gives you that macro level. So when you start to plan, you've already got that strong understanding of what this actually means, what is this curriculum about, and you can find all of that on the Australian curriculum website. Here are, of course, the aims of the Digitech curriculum. Once you're confident with that and you're aware of what it is you're trying to teach, how are you going to teach it, and how will you know that your students have learned it? 3 simple ways to think about what we're doing every day in our classroom. So there are those aims. I'm not going to read them out to you. Really important to remember too that at the heart of this curriculum is computational thinking, and we're thinking about supporting students in making generalizations, looking at algorithmic thinking, modeling, implementing, evaluating, problem solving, so to speak, with a digital solution at the end of it. The other thing I think is really important to remember, because some teachers, as we know, have different levels of access to the devices, connectivity differs, but it's not an excuse to opt out of this curriculum, as 50% of this curriculum can be enacted unplugged, meaning without access to the devices. Really important to remember too that this curriculum supports our students. Oops, we've just lost the PowerPoint, Martin.
All right, nice bit of Microsoft Word just shut down, so just keep talking and I'll get it back up again.
So while Martin's bringing up the three little graphics that were up there, we were talking about computational thinking, design thinking, and systems thinking. And students apply different ways of thinking when they're determining and using data, processes, and digital systems to create their innovative digital solutions. So that's just a graphic to remind us about what we're doing, creating digital solutions. Thanks, Martin. We're back. Excellent. All right. And again, here's another graphic just to remind you about what that actually means. What is computational thinking? There's some examples for you when we're modelling aspects of solutions, sequencing steps, looking at algorithmic thinking, our design thinking. Nothing new there. You've been doing that with your students all the way along when we're looking at problem solving. Now we've got systems thinking, looking for connections between solutions and systems and understanding the components of systems as opposed to just being passive users of these systems. Thanks, Martin. Now I'm conscious I'm powering along, but I just really want to get to the examples as soon as possible to make you, or to support you, so that you can go away from this web conference or webinar with some practical ways to start. So if you think about it this way, all primary teachers are very, very clever at looking at teachable moments. So whilst you might be in mathematics, you make an automatic connection to something that might have happened in history or again in science. Let's think about the digital technologies curriculum that way. Whilst in the Digitech curriculum, even though you are expected to teach discrete content descriptions, there are beautiful ways to align to the other learning areas. Now, I always say this, you cannot teach this curriculum if you are not ICT capable yourself. So your students still need to be developing the ICT general capabilities, but a great place to do that is within the digital technologies curriculum, particularly if you are using devices, programming robots, transferring data from one device to another, etc. Great opportunity to implement to support ICT whilst in other learning areas. Okay, so as I mentioned before, in the primary P to 6 or F to 6, this curriculum was written with the expectation it would be taught in context with other learning areas. Now, in fact, I lied before, with an indicative time of 15 minutes per week, not 30, for the entire technologies curriculum, it is impossible to consider that any quality learning can occur in that short time frame. Therefore, you need to look for the curriculum links and look for opportunities to align existing learning to the new digital technologies curriculum. Now, before I share some of the examples with you and some of the work on the hub, let's get you to tell us what are some of the examples where you are at with algorithms. So not an example, your feeling. And this is just one of the concepts, one of the strands within this curriculum, only one, the algorithmic thinking strand. We've got heard of it, freaks me out, know a bit about it, taught a few lessons, comfortable.
60% have voted, Anna.
Excellent.
So getting into it. Got some interesting information coming up, so that's all good.
Fantastic.
I'm about to close it off. And here we go.
Fabulous. Well, that's really good. So we've got quite a few people who know about it. Some have even taught it, and a few that haven't heard of it, and some people very comfortable. So that's fantastic. So those of you that have heard of it but freaks you out, don't you worry about that. There's nothing to be scared of. And we're going to go through a few examples now. So if we have a look, I can highly recommend, please make sure when you're on the Australian Curriculum website, you go to this PDF and have a look at the continuum of learning, the sequence, because in Queensland here, when we talk to teachers, We're only starting to implement this. We started last year, but if you're a teacher of year 5, 6, it's impossible to expect your students to be right there at that 5, 6 juncture. Maybe they are if you've been doing this for a few years, but for most people you'll need to look back, particularly with this investigating and defining this algorithm strand. So let's have a look at what happens or should have happened in F2. And the next slide is going to actually demonstrate this. Now, I've just created this sequence. This is a thread of this content description so that you can see what it looks like in the F2 as we're progressing. So what is it that makes the next level more complex? So we're moving from representing a sequence of steps in F2 to defining problems before representing the sequence of steps. Now, there's a progression both in the breadth and the depth. As students progress, they have to do more with more sophisticated techniques. Okay, let's have a quick look at this one example. And the buzzing with BBots is a unit or a sequence of lessons on the Digital Technologies Hub. But this is one little example, the F2, where whilst you are in mathematics and you are in measurement and geometry strand, and you're looking at location and transformation, beautiful opportunity to start looking at using a programmable robot. So the students, whilst in mathematics, using this little device to start considering sequencing steps. If this happens, for example, if you're asking students to consider the precise steps involved to get their little robot to do particular things. And on the next slide, we'll actually have some examples. So following and describing a series of steps and planning a route to program the robot to follow a path and write a sequence of steps. So that's our algorithm. So a sequence game. In the next slide, I think we've got examples of the BBot. Oh, this is the buzzing with BBot. So if you are in the Digital Technologies Hub, you'll see this unit of work and everything you need to support you, right down to what is the BBot and how do you program the BBot. And here's another quick example of, I just did this snapshot yesterday and I was thinking, you know what, if I'm in this early algorithmic thinking phase, right down there in the prep to year 2, some simple things in all of those learning areas. So, you know, the idea is to develop students' ability to define and communicate problems precisely and clearly, thinking about computers, thinking about the information that needs to be provided or inputted into systems. So ordering or sequencing events in a familiar fairy tale, asking the students to order some slides showing the correct sequence of Goldilocks and the Three Bears, for example, or writing a set of instructions to complete a set task, making sandwiches, cleaning teeth, using flowcharts to describe the steps, and then articulating those steps to someone else. In mathematics, we've just shown some examples using BBots to follow the outline of two-dimensional shapes, or using BBots for skip counting, programming the BBot to go from one space to another, one spot to another, etc., measuring set lines, etc. Geography, really good example if you were in history looking at the path of the first fleet or moving from one continent to the other, getting your BBot to follow a set path from one, there it is, thanks Martin, from one country to another, that's okay. And here's Sphero, again, the same sort of thing, programming and writing sequences, and more importantly, being able to articulate those instructions to others. In the hub, as we progress through, that was the F2, the BBot one, now we're up to the 3-4, and this sequence of lessons supports that algorithmic strand that we were talking about and just following through at that next level. Now this one I've put up because we've gone to the 5-6, because in this one, this example demonstrates alignment with the history curriculum, but also provides examples of digital solutions. So across each band, students will create digital solutions that will use data, require interactions with users and within systems, and will have impacts on people, the economy and the environment. So solutions may be developed using a combination of readily available hardware and software and or specific instructions provided through programming. So some examples of solutions are instructions for robots, adventure games, products featuring interactive multimedia, including digital stories, animations and websites. And here's another example of resources on the DigiTech Hub, and this is at that 5-6 band, and you'll find them all there by searching in the teacher section and looking at year levels. Okay, and again, here's an alignment with that same algorithmic strand, but this time students are going to be or expected to create a digital solution, and in this case, this Sketch Nation Create was used as they were creating a game, a fantasy game, and this was whilst they were studying fantasy genre in English, and then they're starting to think about how they can design a user interface for a digital system. And in this case, the students were using Sketch Nation Create, but there's a Scratch. There's lots of tools available. All of that information too is on the DigiTech Hub. And here's the alignment with the media arts. There's really good examples of how the media arts aligns to some of these things in DigiTech, particularly when they are implementing digital solutions and learning how to create digital solutions for a real audience. Oh, and there's that example of the Sketch Nation Create when the students were creating their fantasy story. Okay, now we've gone up to, and I do apologise, we're speeding away through this, but I just want to give you an example of how each of the, on the left-hand side here, we've got these concepts. We're looking at our digital systems now, and this is an example of a thread of another content description, and this time we're focusing on digital systems. Okay, so the digital systems concept focuses on components of digital systems, so hardware and software, the computer architecture and operating systems, and networks and the internet. We're talking about wireless, mobile, wired networks, protocols, and this concept is addressed in both strands, but the broader definition of an information system that includes data and people, processes and digital system actually falls under the interactions at the bottom of that sequence on the slide before. But this is a good example of how I'm trying to show you the progression of this particular concept. So on the next slide, we've got an example of, I think it's a history unit, where students, whilst you are in history, and this is a prep to 2, but this could be any year level, in this case they're looking at comparing objects from the past with those of the present and how they've changed over time. So a beautiful segue into DigiTech, looking at common information systems, and then we can start looking at, for example, the telephone, and talking to the students about what technology now is available, or why are we now able to have a portable device as a telephone compared to the phones of the past. And I think on the next slide, one of the units that I actually wrote for the Hub is Clever Computers. And this is where students start to understand the elements of a digital system. What is a digital system? What is the difference between hardware, software? Now, I know this is an F to 2, but I think this is a really important thing to discuss with some of our older students too, and actually understanding what a system is and how all of the components fit together. Oh, and there's that slide where I was mentioning about this discussion whilst in history, but we're talking about some of those important concepts about why the technology is now able, or how through technology we're now able to have portable devices such as iPhones. Okay, in this example here, the digital technologies focus, whilst we're in history, this is a really good example in Year 4 when you're looking at the convicts, and there's a particular content description about the convicts and the First Fleet, and who were these people on the First Fleet? Who are the convicts? Now, the convict database is an excellent resource, but whilst your students are navigating the database and they're finding information, whilst they're in ICT capability there, great time to talk about the digital technologies focus is that we talk about data. By storing data in databases, we're able to use computers to quickly and efficiently organise, sort and analyse data. So this is an excellent example where you can start thinking about databases and discussing what that actually means, and even looking at creating databases themselves. So whilst in history, nice segue across. And there's just a little example of that database. If you haven't been into that database, I highly recommend it. It is fantastic. You can actually search, students can do searches according to gender. There's actually 780 First Fleet convicts in that database, and you can do some simple searches, but you can query by age, gender, occupation, crime, sentence, the time they were transported for, etc. And this is my nice little ICT capability example where you're looking at what would the convicts have tweeted, what snacks would they have shared on Instagram, who would have been their friends on Facebook, what messages would they have texted home, like maybe I help, something like that. So that's just an example of ICT capability also supporting this concept. Now we're going to look very quickly and finally at the data line through here. Now you'll see that I've got two circles there. So we've got the representation of data and the collection, managing and analysing data. Now I think that it's really important that we talk specifically here about the two ways data is looked at and represented here in this curriculum. So data can be presented to us as information in a variety of different ways. So for example, data can be presented as pictures, numbers and words, and data has meaning when it's processed. So for us, when data is organised, structured or presented in a context that makes it useful, it becomes information. So there are software applications that are created to process data. Data processing software accepts the data as input and produces the information as output. So when we're talking to students about a weather app, taking in the data about weather through measurement and analysis, and then producing visual information so we can make decisions about what to wear. And this slide here is just explaining that across the primary school year, students develop their knowledge and understanding of data through exploring and examining the representation of data. They also develop processes and skills for handling data as they collect, sort and present data using digital systems. That's really quite important when you see these two ways within the curriculum. And I've just done here a little bit of a overview of what that looks like according to the data representation and the data collection and management. So the concepts are about data focus on the properties of data and how they're collected and presented and interpreted in a context to produce information. Don't want to get into too much detail there. You can read a lot more about this on the Australian Curriculum website. But if we go to the next slide, yep, you can see that progression again. And this time we're looking at data representation. So in the early years, children focused on making connections between text, images, symbols, as well as numbers. So for example, matching numbers of objects to values. And they also start to look for patterns and sort data. And that's a really great time to think about the mathematic component. While you're in mathematics, in that early number and algebra strand, good opportunity to start looking at recognising and exploring patterns in data and data representation. And in years 3 to 4, we start to present the same data in different ways. And as you can see, as we segue up to starting to look at the binary component up in 7 and 8. But for the primary, we've got right up into year 6, looking at how whole numbers are used to represent all data in digital systems. Okay, now this is a bit hard to read, but I just wanted to demonstrate here in this data representation that in visual arts, media arts, and in mathematics, statistics and probability, data representation, interpretation, these strands in the other learning areas are also opportunities to support the components across in Digitech. Now, here we've got a couple of examples. So in the, let's just say in the early years with the emoji fun and the about me, so whilst teaching mathematics concepts within the number and algebra strands, when we're looking at recognising and explaining patterns, identifying, repeating and growing patterns, students are starting to recognise patterns in data as pictures and symbols. And we're using digital technologies to explain patterns. So if we were, for example, looking at about me, and students at the very simplest form had to write information down about their name, their age, their address, their hair colour, height, digital image, drawings of themselves, favourite pets, etc. All of this data about themselves is start to think about and explain this as information, okay? So whilst they're looking at examples of eye colour, hair colour, they can start thinking about sorting this information and how many students in the class have brown hair, how many students have blue eyes, starting to make those connections in something as simple as an about me activity. Or the emoji. In this one, the emojis can be used to show feelings or emotions. So students can start drawing some emojis to represent emotions, happy, sad, content, excited. And then over there with our green eggs and ham example, when the students may be reading some text, and in this case, using a fun example of how many times the word mouse is spoken in that text, fox and goat, let's draw some images. We can also symbolise that. We can use symbols, we can use letters, we can use numbers. And of course there are, yep.
If I can just interrupt there, so these are really some great examples that I'm sure when teachers look at these examples, they say, oh, this is what I do in my classroom anyway now. And I think it's really a good point to make in terms of that digital technologies focus. I might be in a maths lesson, but, you know, how do I, as a teacher, then look at what are the opportunities here for digital technologies to really focus on that part of the learning? Can you just sort of talk us through a bit of that?
Yeah, so I think it's really important. We're talking about pattern recognition, and that when students, probably F2 is a bit difficult to explain to the students, but when we're thinking about computers only make sense of information if it's explicit. Patterning is really important. I think it might be something that teachers, if you go to the next slide, Martin, it might be a better way of explaining this. So the digital technologies focus here, when we're talking about pattern recognition, is the ability to notice the similarities or common differences. So through recognising patterns, we're able to make predictions, okay, and make shortcuts. So this is a really early example here of students looking for patterns or creating their own patterns. But there's, at the F2, they're just exploring patterns in data, and they're representing data as pictures and symbols and starting to think about patterns. But as we segue, or as we move, and hopefully the next slide we might get up to a 3-4 example. Oh, here we go. We're still looking at that early representation. And again, this is the F2 example, but when we're starting to look at patterns and students sorting, now that example of the attribute blocks down at the bottom, so describing and sorting objects such as attribute blocks, whilst you're thinking, what's that got to do with things, they're starting to develop those early pattern recognition concepts. Same with the game of dominoes or looking at sorting houses. And then we get to looking at some of the fun ways that you can look at number. Now, here's the example that we were going to share with our participants, Martin. And this is just looking at the number 9. And we're in mathematics here. So we have a look at the Digitech component. So looking at how we can present data differently in different ways. Now, this is when we move up to the year 3-4 juncture. So I think you've got an activity or a handout here, have you, Martin?
I do, yes. So on the actual handouts, you can see there's one called Number Fun. So basically, what we'd like you to do, if you can download that, I'll do it as well. And what we're trying to work out here is basically, now what we're going to write some of these activities up just to help you in terms of, how can we better connect with, say, number of place value, or it might be, other areas of the curriculum. But this Number Fun, I'm just going to show you the actual document. And essentially what I want you to do is just to have a look at the document we've got, and we're going to put up a bit of a poll that to say what we're trying to do is to work out you know, what sort of information you'd like to see in terms of running an activity. So what instructional text would you like to see, or how much text? So we're very mindful of, when we're providing information, is not trying to give you all the information, you know, that takes too long to read, but giving you enough of any information to get a task started. So this one's, we're just going to give you an example, number fun, and we've basically got a description of the activity, and then why is it relevant? We've put a link to, basically it's about data and data presentation and an alignment. So what I'd like you to do there is have a bit of a think about if we're going to have some documents like this on the web, what are some of the things that are going to be required so you can undertake that activity as easily as possible. So I'm going to put up a poll, and if you can have a look at the instructions that we've given you there, and we'd just like to get a bit of an understanding there about what you think might work. You know, is it enough for you to confidently teach it? Do you want some more examples? The level of detail? You know, is task description and digital technology focus sufficient? So it's really just your opportunity now to say what you find works for you, whether or not, you know, what sort of level of detail. We're getting people voting at the moment, Anna, so about 40% have voted, and you know, this is just going to help us provide a bit of information as we're writing these things. So if you haven't got the task is actually, if you look in the handouts, it's there called Number Fun. So in your control panel, as you're viewing it, there's a document to download. I know Meredith says, can I put up the task again? And it's, well, basically, you know, we've got the task up there to have a look at. So I'll just share that, Anna.
Thank you.
And we'll have a look. So some think that it's a relevant example, we need more detail. Level of detail is fine, but how to assess is handy, so we might talk about that in a minute, Anna. And also the task and description is sufficient, 23% that. So we know that there's going to be a lot of people with various backgrounds, so we're trying to cater for various ranges of backgrounds, aren't we, Anna? So that's handy for us to know, though.
Absolutely. And look, I think this is really good feedback for us, because when we're writing or creating these resources, I'm really cognizant of the fact that we've got some teachers who are going to be engaging with these resources for the very first time, and we want them to not switch off completely if they don't understand what's required. But we've got some teachers, such as those of you that have indicated you know you've already started implementing here. So we want to give you some good, let's just say, authentic examples of decent pedagogy and some great ways to support your students to develop these concepts. So your feedback is really valuable. I think the assessment component is really important, because it's going to be interesting to see how our teachers report on this and how they actually create assessment tasks that, whilst they are assessing Digitech, they may actually find the digital solution might be a geography digital solution, or the students might be creating a solution in another learning area, but that means that they still have to report on Digitech. So this is something we're considering when we're writing these resources.
And I've got a good comment from Christine Mills, has mentioned, you know, based on what she's experienced in high school and now in primary school, the resources must instill confidence in the teachers. So that's an interesting point.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you for that. Okay, so Martin's put up this next slide, and look, data representation is not limited to numbers, so there's software around to explore analysis of text, and I loved using Wordle when I used to teach students, particularly when we're looking at persuasive text or looking at samples of different types of text. So this example is just encouraging your students to identify words that occur more frequently or have greater prominence in a piece of text. And the example I used is a quick and simple way to present data within a simple investigation. For example, ask students to name their favourite pizza topping, whack those into a Wordle and Shazam, let's have a look at what comes out. So the students' preferences are there for you to see. But that's just another example of something fun. They're doing some ICT capability in there as well. So thanks, Martin. Okay, now QR codes. Another fun way to think about this, because when we're looking at QR codes, so the data can be presented in the form of codes, with the barcodes obviously, and then we look at these QR codes. And so students can create QR codes for library books, so they can write a short description of one of their favourite books, and then create the QR code using a QR creator website. Really easy to do. And then students can use the QR code reader to read a little bit of information about the books that the class may have read. And this is a fun activity, again, ICT capability, but then looking at that data and how the data is represented in a different way in the Digitech. Again, looking at that Digitech component. Okay, we're finally getting to the end of our session, so thank you for being such good listeners. I hope we've still got everyone and people haven't disappeared. I hope we're not, I feel conscious that we're just talking at you, but there's quite a bit of info to get out. This strand here, or this thread of concept, is the collecting, managing and analysing data. Now, most teachers are doing this all the time in other learning areas, particularly the F to 2, 3 to 4, not so much so maybe in 5, 6, but when we're looking at this particular aspect of the curriculum, this focuses on student developing skills to create digital solutions that focus on collecting, managing, analysing data, which involves the nature and properties of data, how they are collected, interpreted, using a range of digital systems and peripheral devices, and interpreting the data when creating information. Okay, so I think the next slide, for example, you can see how we can collect number data and text data. So you might be in mathematics, you might be in science, having some scientific investigations, looking at presenting that data using spreadsheeting software. Very early on, here's an example when students are using pictographs. The unit I wrote for the DigiHub was about the data detected, and this was F to 2, but could easily be done in 3 and 4, where students are conducting a simple survey. Again, they're in mathematics and they're in the strand of probability, etc., but they are still looking at different ways to present their data. They're collecting some information, they're classifying, they're grouping, and great time to start looking at spreadsheeting software and demonstrating how they can present their information differently. There are some fantastic apps available as well if you have access to those resources. In the DigiHub, we then move up to the 3-4 and up to 5-6 rubbish recording, part 1 and then part 2. And these are really good examples because it's actually providing students with authentic opportunities in their learning. So they're actually looking at the rubbish, level of rubbish in their area, and creating some information and some ways of presenting this to a real audience. Okay, and again, here we're looking in the 5-6, we're in history, and the students are actually looking at that inquiry question about the reasons people migrated to Australia. And who were these people? Okay, so what were their role? What was something I really liked about this was when we were looking at I was looking at the researching component in the HASS curriculum here. They're organising and representing data in a range of formats, including tables, graphs, large and small scale maps, etc. But while they're in history and geography, this is a really good opportunity to start looking at some of the software available to interpret and visualise the data and to create the information. And these infographics are some examples. So the students are actually engaging with some of those tools and thinking about the ways of presenting their information as opposed to just standing up and telling us or providing an information report or a PowerPoint presentation or something like that. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but here we are in history and again in geography, great opportunities. And Martin's popped this one in here. Thank you, Martin. There's some really good tools here for creating your own infographics.
Okay, and if you want the handout, there's one of the handouts called Free Tools for Creating Infographics, and that you can download that and just click on the link for those infographics. What I've found is by using some of those ones, they all have various things you can do, quite similar little templates, but some of the ones I've put up are ones that you can sign in for free, but there are some ones that I've got in there that you can purchase elements later on if you want to, but they all do it for free. And just try which ones, you know, some kids like might like different aspects of each one of those tools, so just see how they're usable. But you can download that at the end of this webinar.
Excellent. Okay, and here's another example of, we're in geography here and history, of students being able to consider different ways of representing and presenting, I should say, presenting their data and their information, their research. And finally, the last one, I just popped this one up, this infographic. I love this because this is showing some information about our Z-Gen, the students in our schools at the moment, and of course our alphas who are coming through as well, and some information about the workforce. But this is just a good example of an infographic that provides opportunities to demonstrate how we've got some symbols and we've got some numbers and we've got images and that sort of thing. So I just popped that in there just out of interest anyway. Thanks, Martin. And look, finally, what I would like to say, and I say this often, and this is my big mantra in regard this curriculum in particular, it doesn't matter if you are just starting out in this journey or if you are well positioned in your implementation and your confidence level. No matter where you are, really important to think about those students in front of you. What is it you need to teach them? So that's your content. How are you going to do that? And how will you know they've learned that? So the what, the how, the what is your curriculum. The how, you'll need some resources, and that's where the Digital Technologies Hub, I think, is going to be so valuable. And it's being added to, resources are being added to this space regularly. I also would say just start somewhere, even if it's with one content description, if you haven't already started, in one of the, in your learning, in your year level. Start small. Start with something that you feel confident that you can achieve, but start where success is most likely. And if you do that, I'm quite convinced that you will have success. And don't forget to ask others for support. So if you've got some digital champions in your school, or if you've got access to workshops or conferences, put your hand up and say, you know what, I would like to attend, because the only way this curriculum is going to be successfully implemented is if you teachers, the wonderful hardworking people that are in our classrooms, actually have the resources and the confidence and capabilities to teach it, and to teach it well. So I hope I haven't bored you all to sleep. I hope you're still there. And not sure, Martin, whether people want to ask me any questions or whether we even have the capability to do that.
Yep, we do. So if you've got some questions of Anna, we've still got about 64 people online. So I think that's testament to the interest level. While if there's any questions coming up, I'll be able to see them. But basically, Karen Murphy had a bit of a point, and one of the things she mentioned was how critical school leadership is in this whole implementation journey. And when we're talking about capability of ICT, just that confidence and that critical need for leadership to get on board.
Yeah, I will say something about that. And look, I'm not going to hide my feelings on this. We have an Australian curriculum now. It is an entitlement to, or it is expected that every student in Australia receives this curriculum, regardless of classroom, regardless of region, of state, etc. If our teachers are not supported in developing their capacities or the resources available, that is really quite sad. So it's really important that our school leaders understand that this is a new curriculum. It's something that will take time, and teachers do need to feel confident. If you're not confident with the content, then the rest will just not happen. We all know that. Our pedagogy, it's hard enough when you're trying to teach something with our behaviour management and our strategies, but if you're not confident in the content, then it's going to be very difficult to teach it and to provide engaging opportunities, and that our students come away thinking that is really good fun. So I think I understand that, but I think what we have to keep doing, so in a lot of the places where I'm speaking, we talk to school leaders and we try to help them understand what this curriculum is about as well. That it isn't just ICT capability, it's a little bit different.
Yeah, and also just if you have seen our other webinars that we've recorded, which this one will be recorded as well and put up in a couple of weeks, but we've got one with Chris Hart was about auditing the curriculum and talked about leadership and auditing you know, people's expertise and capacity. And then the next one was with Rebecca Vivian from the CSER and Lauren Stanhope, and they talked about the different ways of getting PD, professional learning, and talked about their online course that they run. So again, it's really those sort of resources are very, very important to do that. So, and I just want to say thank you so much for sharing your ideas. And Anna's will still be writing some resources for us, and we're going to use some of the information we got out today about how to, you know, what level of detail we're going to have for those resources. So we'll talk a bit more about that. But thanks for sharing your time, Anna, and the participants who were online engaging with us. That was fantastic.
And Martin, can I just add, if there's anyone that Martin did put my contact details up before, my email address there, please don't hesitate to contact me if you want to ask me some questions or just want some clarification about something. If you didn't get that, my email is anna.kinnane@qct.edu.au.
Yep.
All right, thank you everyone. Thanks, Martin.
Yep. Okay, thanks a lot, and we'll see you for the next webinar, which will be in about a month's time. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.